بلش؟ اوكي اهلا وسهلا بالجميع.
I welcome everyone, and I thank IPS for allowing me this chance to be part of this session. The title of this session is The Strategic Options to Redress the Balance of Power and Reestablish the Centrality of the Palestinian Cause. In order to start the discussion about this, I think the title is a bit confusing or confused. My suggestion when I wrote to the speakers is that they would focus on how and the means for re-establishing the centrality of the Palestinian cause, because this would in turn change the balance of powers, and what are the requirements for re-establishing the centrality of the Palestinian cause. And these are multiple, and they include the political realm, organization level, forms of resistance and struggle. And of course, this is left to the speakers to address and how they want to tackle it. Because in the first session, it talked about the international and regional situation and their impact on the Palestinian cause. And the second session talked about the spaces for the uprising, the multiplicity of uprising spaces in a detailed manner. We're talking about the most recent uprising in Jerusalem, and it was a very useful and beneficial, the discussion that took place in session 2. And so in this session, I was thinking of how to, because the uprising gave us signals and indicators on how the Palestinian cause can regain its centrality, because it was called the Jerusalem uprising, and thus it is the uprising of all Palestinians. Jerusalem is the symbol, because when it was the Jerusalem uprising, it encompassed all Palestinians, and this is a very important indicator at the level of the politics and organization and what is needed. It also showed that the struggle is against settler colonialism and an apartheid regime, and it is not a matter that can be reduced down to the occupation that took place or started in 1967. So this is just a few opening remarks regarding the topic of this session. There is interpretation to English that is available. You click the globe and select the language that you would want to select English, basically, to listen to the interpretation. The speakers today, now in this session, are 6 speakers. All of them are distinguished by the fact that they are youth, young, and I think this is what we want and hope, that they give us this push, this boost, with also the vision of the youth and the horizons for the future. The first speaker, Hashem Abu Sharma. I will not speak a lot about his profile, because the information is there in his bio, but I will just introduce him very briefly. He is a PhD student in Oxford University at the Environment and Geography School. He received Ibrahim Dakkak Award for his one of his articles. He received MA in refugees and migration studies, and lives currently or continues to live in Oxford. So at that time, allocated for each speaker is between 12 to 15 minutes. Please stick to the amount allowed of time allowed in order to give also time for Q&A later on. All the questions will be submitted in writing, and I will try to convey the questions to the speakers. Hashem, you have the floor. Thank you, Dr. Jamil, for hosting me, and for IPS for hosting me and for this session. I'm not sure you can hear me clearly because I have a poor internet connection. Everybody's saying that they can hear him. My presentation is very brief and has three main components. The first is true that the recent uprising was a way of transcending the geographic fragmentation, and talked about a formula from Gaza to Jaffa to Hebron to Ramallah, and that it was against colonization in its different manifestations, but it was different in how to deconstruct the Palestinian identity through the different geographies. Also, for example, in 1948, we have the Israeli system that wants to obliterate the Palestinian presence by distorting their identity and calling them Israeli Arabs, and also impose and dictate their culture and their policies through their establishments. The second geography is the 1967 occupied territories by having a military occupation, and also a PA that is hiding behind a national project, whereas it is a proxy of the occupation. And the third is in Gaza Strip, whereby the occupation controls everything in the strip and create some form of hierarchy in Palestine. And so we talk about Gaza martyrs as numbers, as statistics, as a normal thing of the siege. And this was also obvious during the attack on Gaza. People killed were just numbers in order to normalize Palestinian lives in the different geographies. And therefore, we need to take into consideration these tangible differences between the different Palestinian geographies. But all the Palestinian presence in all these geographies is subject to the same settler colonial regime, but they create different ways of fragmenting this identity and preventing a collective national struggle project to end this colonization by attacking refugees in their refugee camps, by having the apartheid regime, by having the exclusive system of citizenship or identity cards. And when we see in history, the military occupation was first forced between 1948 to 1966 in 1948 territories before it was shifted to the 1967 territories. For example, when Haifa was occupied in 1948, people were forcibly evicted and transferred who remained in the city to Wadi and Snas area, and they were subject to military rule, and there was curfews, and they gave them permits if they wanted to move around in order to restrict their movement. And there were different ways to encourage a voluntary migration, internal migration for these Palestinians into the other Palestinian territories. And one of them was very famous in 1956 that failed in later on. I want also to talk about the cultural space, and based on Dr. Jamal Hilal's article, and since the culture and the cultural sector was very prominent in the recent uprising, we should know that the culture is misused and abused by the Israeli occupation to obliterate and change the cultural identity of the country. And it is also subject to the market and making the culture as a commodity. Also, with the colonization and the fragmentation of Palestinian presence that wanted to obliterate any collective Palestinian presence and wanted to create dependency on Israeli state entities and institutions. and after a class of intelligentsia that appeared in 1948 territories, after 20 years of the military rule, there were plans by the Israeli committee, a specific committee, to reduce Palestinian presence to the cultural space by removing and stripping them of any other political identity. And Amir, who was the head of the committee, who said that we need to have efforts to make Palestinians take interest only in culture, to take away their mind away from politics or any other issues. And I'm quoting here, there is a need to establish musical groups and entertainment groups, and this in turn allows them to express their emotions through culture, and this allows also the employment of efforts of university students. And the Roman slogan, entertainment and bread, is very appropriate here. And this is how Israel wanted to use culture to serve its projects and its plans. So we see in Haifa, we saw the cultural scene, and we saw how it is linked to these policies, even if they challenge them. But if we see in the cultural scene means for creating a liberation thinking and intellectual ways of moving forward, then it can be also a commodity that is a good, that has price and that can be sold. And so we need to be very careful of how we use also culture in these regards. Also, we have the participation in the Israeli elections, and the other according to the authoritarian PA for the calling for voting for the Israeli Knesset forces a system according to a minority that of elite that is the Israeli Arabs, and they give legitimacy to the Zionist project by accepting the role of minority in a colonial state, and therefore avoid the main contradiction, which is the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized, and does not allow people, or they try to strive for equal rights, whereas the state is based on eradicating any Palestinian presence in the country. So this is even the term of Israeli Arabs is a significant symbol of that, because calling them as such and refusing to call them Palestinians is the main contradiction, and Israeli colonizers cannot accommodate even a minority that is Palestinian, and therefore they had to call them Arabs. And they give them the Israeli citizenship in order to collect money and taxes. On the other hand, we have the authoritarian PA in Ramallah, despite the fact that it has representations in different cities in the West Bank, but they are their main headquarters is in Ramallah, and they accepted a neoliberal entity that has no vision, neither political, social, or economic, and accepted to be an extension of the Israeli occupation, and was maybe the most dangerous role of the PA, in addition to allowing allowing the donors to dictate their conditions. And we lost the speaker.
وين راح هشام؟ هاشم أين أنت؟ وين راحت رنا؟ هاني
أظن انقطع الاتصال عنه.
We have lost the speaker, maybe was disconnected.
وين هو؟ وين موقعه هو مش بقصد، ما أعتقدش إنه بغزة. إذا بغزة
if he's in Gaza, then we understand that the internet connection is poor, but now we have Hashem back. I am in Arroub Refugee Camp. I'm in near Hebron. At least you're not in Gaza, unless Arroub was moved to Gaza. I don't know why it was disconnected. I didn't know where I was disconnected. It was disconnected for maybe 1.5 minutes. You were talking about the political elites, and you were discussing the role of political elites in the West Bank, the role of the PA, basically. I was saying that we have the self-rule authority that is authoritarian, that has its headquarters in Ramallah, that accepted a neoliberal capitalist state, semi-state, that is stripped of any political, cultural, social vision and accepted to be an extension of the occupation by fighting Palestinian resistance and Palestinian intellectuals. Maybe the most dangerous role of the PA, in addition to allowing the Israel and the donors to dictate their conditions, is to legitimize the settlement activities and to accept it as if settlement activities in Lod, Ramla and Haifa is okay, and that Ma'ale Adumim is different from the settlements in Haifa or the evictions in Jaffa or in Lod al-Ramla, or how they are affecting and doing ethnic cleansing projects inside 1948 territories. The Jerusalem uprising showed that even if these differences create different conditions for the Palestinians in the different areas, but these borders and these divisions are illusionary, because we saw Palestinians coming together and also showed the central role of settlers from the West Bank to Haifa and 1948 territories. And so so it presented, this uprising presented the Palestinian cause as a united cause, and also exposed those who did not support it. And that is why the PA assassinated Nizar Banat in such a brutal manner, and why they are using excessive force against protesters, because their tool is to terrorize people, because they lost all national legitimacy. They understand that the conditions that allowed it to be present have vanished, and that it is a collapse is looming. And why do we talk about a liberation thought, and why we need to reestablish the centrality of the Palestinian cause, is that we have a heritage of resistance, a legacy of resistance, and the presence of resistance. Ghassan Kanafani, in an interview with Richard Barton that was shared again during the uprising, he was asked, why did you refuse negotiations with Zionists? He said it is because it is a negotiation between the sword and the neck. Also, Najil Ali, in his cartoons, he was able to predict what the role of those who are engaged in negotiations with Israel and what the consequences would be. And that is why he said no to reconciliation, no to peace with Israel. And also Basel Araj and others, and many Palestinians who refused to appear before Israeli courts because they refused to recognize them, and therefore refusing this negotiations and Israeli occupation. And from the experiences of indigenous people, by refusing to recognize the legitimacy of the Zionist state, this should create a liberation, cultural thoughts and thinking, and would create a national liberation project.
شوي نقاش والخلاصات من يعني وين التفكك.
Thank you, Hashem. Many of the points that you mentioned require much more discussion. The issue of politics and local government, Gaza, West Bank, and Diaspora. This is already, I mean, it's worth discussing. What can we get out of this to create a new reality? The cultural area has its own specificities, that where we can have discussion. It is not limited to geopolitics. It is 1948, if you write an article and publish it. So culture has the mobility, greater mobility or outreach compared to other, such as areas such as the political area or geopolitics. Now, the next speaker, or is Miss or Mrs. I would say Miss Dana Farraj. She's a legal researcher and lawyer, member of Palestinian Bar Association since 2019. So since 2 years, she has been a recognized legal practitioner, and she has master's degree in IHL from Marseille and BA in law from Marseille University, and she has interest in human rights law and international and ICC. And now the floor is yours. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Jamil, and thanks for the IPS that gives us this platform to start, to continue being connected and discussing. And thank you, Hashem, for the very valuable intervention with something that I was hesitating to speak of. Since IPS contacted me to speak of the uprising, I was thinking of what happened after the uprising, after Nizar Banat was assassinated in the heart of the West Bank, and all the oppression that followed, and all the practices that we witnessed and they continue, such as in arresting the different scholars, men and women. So my idea was to speak about the depression that I had along many others. But at the end of the day, this uprising gave us a new hope in achieving success and victory. And that this will end in the disappearance of this occupation. And here I start with 3 points. First, the uprising that happened since May. It is an accumulative thing that makes us think on how to build on that and how to deal with them as an important milestone to achieve, let's say, victory, and also how to have an uprising that was supported by the international community. And at the end of the day, also some points on how to regain the status of the Palestinian cause and to reorganize ourselves as youths seeking to achieve objectives that the Palestinian people have been struggling to achieve since 70 years. So the uprising as a struggle milestone, it's important to point out that this uprising came after postponing the elections in April, and elections were part of a hope for change when they were announced in January. Elections were partial, not representative. We're speaking about elections in the West Bank and Gaza. Even Jerusalem was not clear if they were going to participate or not. So we're speaking about elections that would include half or less of the Palestinian people without including the Palestinian Diaspora or Palestinians in 1948. So the uprising took place on May 18th and pointed out that the Palestinian people cannot be divided, and we are one nation, and made the Palestinians to stop thinking of their immediate concerns. Sometimes they go to, in West Bank, they go to work in the settlements, and in Gaza, how to leave Gaza, and Palestinians, 1948, how to keep their identities, and for people in the support, how to return. So the uprising came back to tell the Palestinians, you are in the same place and struggling in the same place. The military capabilities that prove that resistance with all its forms is the only thing that can bring us our rights. And ceding many things across the years did not contribute to anything. So resistance, rockets from Gaza hitting the depth of the Zionist depth in Ramon airport that had to be shut down. This gave us the hope that resistance that did not stay still, and all the wars failed to sabotage the Palestinian resistance and capacity building. The last point in the uprising and how it resulted in regaining the Palestinian discourse. I'd like to mention certain points as I felt in France, since I have experience in France, and we contacted a number of groups there. There is a change, there is an ascension to the Palestinian discourse that speaks about the full Palestinian geography and not the two-state solution or Oslo or post-Oslo. Even in Latin America, the demonstrations were speaking about all of Palestine, full Palestine, the Palestinian right to resistance and struggle, and even the right to armed struggle that is internationally supported. These slogans were absent for so many years from international struggle, even after a number of normalization projects between Israel and some Arab countries, which gave us some bad feelings. But the Arab nations are the ones that always give us that push and support. How this uprising failed a number of Israeli projects. Many proposals were submitted from an American-Israeli point of view that do not see the Palestinians more than a group of people living in parts of historical Palestine. Some of the proposals, such as annexation and territorial swaps, it's important to discuss this point. And swapping land or exchanging territories, especially with Al-Muthallath area and the Palestinian 1948 areas near or Al-Fahim area. Especially for Al-Fahim area, and what Al-Fahim represents for Israel. It includes a majority of Arabs or Palestinians, and it is the connection between the Palestinians in 1948 and the West Bank. It's adjacent to the Green Line, and it does not have settlements, but around Al-Mutalla there are a number of settlements, and there is a majority of Palestinians and Arabs, and now this this uprising proved that how this uprising of Palestinians there in Al-Fahim and areas proved that they keep their identity. That's why Israel was targeting this area. Across 70 years, Israel failed to change the Palestinian awareness. So this uprising has failed or foiled the attempt to exchange territories. And it also foiled and failed the deal of the century. And here we speak about the American proposal for the deal and how there are projects to turn the concept of Palestinian refugees so that it does not include all Palestinian refugees, but only the first generation of refugees. This was part of that ultimate deal or deal of the century. That is to this uprising contributed to failing that. And we remember how the US cut all fundings for UNRWA, which is the existence of which is symbolic for the Palestinian right to return. And here, to continue the last point, part of the issues, there is the justification of Israeli use of collective punishment and house demolition. That Israel as a state does not need a collective punishment, although all the international conventions consider collective punishment as a crime. And here I move to the role of the UN and not to pin high hopes on them, as if they will save us. At the end of the day, the UN deals with the Palestinian cause as that of a humanitarian refugee issues, but not as a just cause to achieve the rights of Palestinians. here I move to the last point. The last point, which is how to regain the position of the Palestinian cause. Not about the role of the Palestinian Authority. Here, we're not only exclusively on Nizar Banat, we have to speak about an authority that attacks assemblies, organizations, and even attacks the judiciary and struggle fighters, even at a simple indication how this authority seeks more hegemony, that it is since 10 years, and the head of the Palestinian Authority issued more than 230 decree laws, which should be exclusive to emergency cases. But although across the life of the Palestinian Legislative Council 1996 and 2006, only 90 legislations were issued. So this shows how these people target or serve this. This authority and I'd like to mention this is a dangerous thing, that there are people in the heart of Ramallah. 3 girls were arrested, and these were activists were detained for a simple reason, because they wrote graffiti on the walls. The PA police arrested them for a complete night, full night. This could be simple considering what is happening now, but even with the simplest thing, we see how our colleague Fadi Quran was arrested. There is no clear doubt. He was carrying a Palestinian flag and he was arrested.
I will stop here and we can continue in the discussions. Thank you for hosting me. Thank you, Dana. You said something that a lot that can raise a lot of discussions. I think the uprising was a milestone of a struggle on the path towards liberation, the importance of the youth and their role and how to organize them. This is something maybe that you did not address, but you said, you implied that it is possible to increase support, that the uprising increased the support and solidarity with the Palestinian cause. But then the question is, how can we sustain this level of solidarity and increase it, expand on it, and build upon it? And so when we talk about the uprising, restoring, reuniting the Palestinian geography from the river to the sea, and if then we can propose a new project to replace the two-state solution, or the state in West Bank and Gaza Strip, for replace it by a state all in historic Palestine. And you talked about the PA and how decisions are made outside the institutions, and that there are no real institutions now, and therefore there is no accountability, and all decisions are individual or are decided on by a very small group. And also the assassination of Nizar Banat, and that proved that there is an authority that practices oppression if anybody defies it. And so there are no institutions, nothing, but rather individuals who decide to retaliate. And now the third speaker is Razi, who is a Palestinian researcher and writer, and I think he was born in Haifa and studied at the Haifa University. Hello. I was born in Abilene in the Galilee, and it is located between Haifa and Akko, and thank you for organizing this conference and this session, and for the speakers who spoke before me, and in advance for those who speak after me. To be honest, when I saw the title is about redressing the balance of power. My first question is that we are still following a balance of power. Are we still figuring in this balance of power? Are we far from the balance of power, or has it flipped this balance of power and has only one side to it? And this will take from the recent uprising, the most recent uprising, which was very distinguished at many different levels. But I believe that there are two important things that happened during this uprising that could serve this discussion that I want to talk about in my now, and how to build upon them. The first and foremost is that this uprising showed the extent of the gap between Palestinian political elites in all of Palestine and Palestinian people on the streets. On the streets, there were people, and the Palestinian political elites were in a different, complete world. And here I'm talking about the West Bank and 1948 territories, because the similarities between these two places have become evident during the recent uprising, that the political elites, whether the PA in the West Bank or the Arab Follow-up Committee in 1948 territories, it was evident that there is a gap that cannot even be bridged between them and the people people on the streets. I don't think that they took the decision not to join the uprising, but rather they were unable to catch up with it. I think the uprising went far ahead, and it was beyond their capacities, their roles, their capacities, basically. And this is something I've noticed in 1948 territories, that the political forces, when they went to talk to them, to work as a mediator between Israel and the people, they were unable to play that role, because those who were on the streets and the people in general were very far from them, because there is a huge gap. And also in the West Bank, the authority, the figures, the symbols of the Palestinian Authority were not present on the streets, not on the protests. You cannot see them, you cannot see the flags. There was on the strike, the national strike day, there was no clear Palestinian leadership for the people. We are living in a situation whereby there are political elites that are not related to the people on the streets, but they are only concerned with how to keep their presence, to maintain their existence as benefiting from the situation, or just their interests and how they are linked to the international community. Their preoccupation is only how to maintain their existence rather than how to liberate Palestine. They only want to maintain their existence and their privileges. This is something that we need to conclude, as something has become evident during the recent uprising. The other important thing to also take into consideration is the tremendous capacities and efforts that became active outside the traditional political groups. I think there were hundreds and thousands of people, of activists, who worked in their own areas, own corners, in the areas that they worked in, that they know very well, without any orders, without any organization. Each Palestinian during the uprising found a place, his niche, where he can be beneficial, and he did that. Some, for example, they established a channel on Instagram, on social media, and worked on raising the Palestinian voice on their own. There were initiatives for Palestinian National Economy Week, for example, and these were initiatives taken by the people. From this uprising, we can safely say that this was a moment when the Palestinian people on the streets went beyond their political leaders in terms of political actions and activism. They are not thinking about it as a replacement for these political elites, but they went beyond them. They were working on their own without orders from anyone, without organization, without a vision from anyone or a strategy from anyone. And therefore, this uprising had two aspects. One was negative and was terrifying, and there was one that was very positive. The negative side is when we discovered that the Palestinian situation does not have political elites. We live in a situation where we don't have political factions, without political ideology, without political vision or political elites, while as the glimmer of hope is that the generations, like my generation, they have the capacities and are capable and have sufficient knowledge and sufficient experience and sufficient skills to work on their own. I think this is the most important thing that we need to start addressing. The third point, which I thought was important about the uprising, is that after the second intifada until this date, we have a history of uprisings. Every few years, people cannot put anymore with the colonization, and so they have an uprising. They express their anger, and then they go back and go steps backwards. And the occupation and the colonization comes to punish us. But our history is a history of uprisings, and it is not out of vacuum, but because we don't have the infrastructure to carry it from these mini uprisings, if you want, to a full-fledged intifada uprising, because these are spontaneous by the people. But if we want to have a long-term intifada, we need to have political parties, political actors who have the vision to sustain these things. And so in the absence of political vision, a political project, and in order to overcome this stage, we need to start discussing drastically and comprehensively the Palestinian situation, the status. And this is the question today. This is not us and the balance of power. The balance of power maybe is with Israel, but we, and what do we want from the balance of power in Palestine today? We don't have consensus on the format of the liberation. What is the Palestinian dream for any political regime? Any political regime that does not have a political identity or imagined the dream. So what is the imagined reality for the Palestinians? In the 70s, it was the dream that was built by the PLO has turned into a nightmare. We see it now on the streets. They carry batons and harass Palestinians, and they are killing and assassinating the opposition. So we say that we want to liberate ourselves from the colonizers, but the dream has details, and the details now are missing in recent years. And in order to start any political project, we need to first sketch our imagination, and where do we want? What is the dream? What is our ambitions? And therefore, as Palestinians, we need today to start from beneath zero, from before square one, because there always this discussion why those young people on the streets are not taking the role of the current Palestinian leadership and take the PLO and lead the way forward like in the 60s and the 70s. I think in this discussion there is some form of overlooking and forgetting the current context in Palestine, because when we start today, we don't start from zero to establish the Palestinian National Project. We're below zero. We will have to first finish the manifestations of the current stage, reach zero level, and then from there start to build again. Because I believe that the stage we are in now is where we have to deal with the Palestinian context that needs to be reconstructed all over again. the discussion about politics and culture, I want to address that. That was mentioned earlier. I don't think we can separate culture from politics. Politics formulate the culture that we have during the PLO when it came from up, down, and the culture would feed back into the politics. And therefore, we cannot separate these two fields. These are organically interlinked. If we are without any political project, and I believe that today we are outside all political programs and projects, all political programs in Palestine now has hit a dead end. They cannot be sustained, and the reason is that they have their own deficiencies. They misread the landscape and the conditions, and also because Israel, when they signed with these political programs, they were buying time. They did not want to find solutions. When they signed Oslo, they wanted to buy time and end the first intifada. They did not want to end the struggle. When they agreed with us in 1948 territories, they wanted some form of agreements, and therefore Israel went beyond these political programs. They disregard them completely, and those who have a monopoly over the political powers in Palestine are also deficient, and they are unable to go beyond their current programs because of their economic and interest relations with the colonizers, but also with the international community. How much time do I have? I have 2 more minutes. Okay. I didn't hear what you said, Jamil. I'm just saying, please continue. After this, I believe that in terms of the first step that we need to undertake to re-establish the centrality of the Palestinian cause, especially in the aftermath of the most recent uprising, is to regain politics in its popular understanding of the Palestinian people. Not only Israel confiscates Palestinians' political rights, I think the Palestinian leaders are playing the same role now by confiscating our role as Palestinians to express ourselves, express our vision about the struggle, about our vision, about our social, economic, and cultural life. And also the political leadership, Palestinian political leadership, are working on monopolizing politics, not only monopolizing Palestinian representation, but rather the struggle, the Palestinian question as a whole, monopolizing the Palestinian cause itself. And this is something I want to say more. I think the oppression that took place in the West Bank is a reaction to the uprising. I want to take it a step further and say that it is the reaction of the political forces and the PA on regarding their feeling of inability during the most recent uprising, because in the uprising, the people felt their momentum. They were really able to reestablish their organization, their power, their efforts, their dreams, but when the PA went down to crack on them, it's because a reaction of their inability. And so when the Fatah activists went down to Al-Manara Square and were raising their Fatah flags, they were announcing to the Palestinian people that the street is ours. And I think everything that happened after the recent uprising is a reaction to that uprising and the inability of the political elites. I think the first step is to have a comprehensive Palestinian dialogue, and not in the traditional sense of the word, and that is the Fatah Hamas, for example, dialogue, or the Palestinian factions. I think there is a need for a comprehensive Palestinian dialogue that is establishing the struggle from it being under the control of political elites on the top of the pyramid, but rather where Palestinians are all partners in drafting their struggle and their resistance, and where they want to go more with all the Palestinian in the Palestinian geography. The other thing that I want to mention And this is something I've noticed from Jamil's article. Our question is always, do we want 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 4 states, 5 states? As if somebody is asking us what we want, or if somebody is telling us, decide, what do you want? And I think we need to also go beyond this struggle over borders, because this is linked to our vision of ourselves and how the world views us. Where are we from the struggle? Not in the fact that there are two national movements, opposing national movements, but rather as a struggle against injustice, against racism, against the racist state, regardless of where their borders are. Why does the world today refuse to accept an Islamic state in Afghanistan, but accepts a Jewish state in Palestine? This is a very important question. So how do we shift our discourse to the world had gone through several phases, and this discourse has been adapted to the capacities of the political elites rather on what the Palestinian people want. It is the political discourse according to what political elites can achieve rather than what the struggle requires. And so we need to go back to the main struggle, and the struggle against the religious state and against injustice and apartheid. I hope that I didn't take too long.
Thank you, Razi. You mentioned several important issues, and these are issues of discussion. Anyway, they have to be issues of discussion. You spoke that the uprising have shown the level of alienation between the families, the households, people, and this is true. Number two, it showed that there are potentials outside the existing political establishments or structures. It showed that they can take action outside these structures. And nonetheless, and this requires further formulation. It showed that we still lack vision. We lack two issues. Representation for, we don't have representation for all of Palestinians. PLO was there, but now maybe it is taken over by the PA, or it is shelved. It is not a state, neither a liberation movement. Also, the political project requires more discussion. On grounds, as Raji mentioned, grounds of justice and what we want. We want this colonial settlement state to be dismantled, to decolonize. Decolonization of this state, and to start thinking of a democratic state, equality, to totally give up Zionism as an ideology. And the political discourse needs total change. I agree that having the PA resulted that the Palestinian geography and history has been altered in the struggle of Palestinian people as well. The Palestinian cause, as if it existed since 1967. And when we remove occupation, everything ends. So as if there is no refugees, no, this requires a new discourse, political discourse. And here comes the role of the democratic, progressive, cultural area, if you wish. Abu Mazen has cultural vision, but we are speaking about cultural, progressive discourse that is capable of outreach to the world, ensure more solidarity as the blacks won international solidarity. Now we give the floor to Ruwaida As-Safadi. She's a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. Basically, she's from Akka. She has a BA from Beirut Arab University, and she's a journalist at MBC and a reporter, a translator and editor of content. Ruwaida, the floor is yours for 15 minutes. If you take extra 1 minute, we will not intervene.
جميعا دكتور جميل لكل الزملاء
Thank you, Dr. Jamil, and thanks for all the participants. All regards for you from Beirut. I'd like to tell you one thing. If internet goes away or electricity, I'm sure you understand the situation here in Lebanon. I'm really glad to be with you in this session, and also glad to meet this young generation of Palestinians that we are proud of. We are speaking about Beirut. When we speak of Beirut, we are speaking about the Palestinian echo in Lebanon. If there is a group of Palestinians there, you are the voice and we are the echo of Palestine. I would like to speak about 3 areas: before the Jerusalem uprising, during the uprising, and after the uprising. And I would like to speak about our presence as refugees in Lebanon and how we get the image coming from Palestine and the feeling that we feel towards everything happening in Palestine. Before Jerusalem uprising, I say we were living total depression, and here 12 Palestinian refugees and communities were living this feeling of being neglected. Where is the Palestinian cause? What are the requirements to regain the situation of Palestinian cause? Before this uprising, this did not exist, neither in the news show. And when we hear about Palestine only during the Nakba day or land day, and that's it. Particularly, why I'm speaking at the newspapers. I'm speaking about the Arab newspapers in general. Before this day, the uprising, on 13th, there was an uprising or revolution in Lebanon. We were stuck between these 2 parts. Shall we go to demonstrations since we are part of this social fabric in Lebanon, or we shouldn't do that since we have a history before 1975 and 82 and the Civil War? So should we participate or not, or to stay neutral? Then Jerusalem uprising came. It brought hope back, and we will not forget the normalization that happened before that. We are in a position. Are they going to send us to any country, to Sinai, to Jordan, or where? So we were living again the feelings of Palestinian refugees, underlined because refugees are always forgotten. They're forgotten from the political game and the designs, and always 3 solutions proposed for refugees. And they move with us with solutions that we find politically. We're living the situation, and we were living this effect of normalization. What will happen, what happened, and are we the voice or the echo for the Palestinian voice? Razi asked, are we still in this balance of powers or not? And when Jerusalem uprising came, we got this push, this support. And Palestinians took initiative again. And the Israeli occupation army that we used to hear as being the strongest army, they were afraid of land combat and facing the Palestinians face to face. This uprising gave us a strong push that in Palestine is coming. This uprising, I called it in one of the articles, that it is not the battle of liberation, but it is the beginning of liberation battles. That's when we're living and we're listening to the political speeches and how the Palestinian resistance is developing and getting stronger. This reflects on us as refugees. We are divided, not to forget the existing political division. This division affects everything. And we connected this battle with the Zionist speech and discourse that is to turn the Palestinians into refugees. We don't have rights as refugees, but we did not stop there. We stopped the idea that Palestine can be victorious and can return, and we as refugees, we can one day become citizens. We dream to be citizens. This dream, this battle made this dream much closer. When we saw this thing being materializing for 12 days, then we started wondering what are the conclusions. But it is over. Was it with conditions or not? Or as Razi mentioned, we are a people of uprisings, uprising after uprising. Is this a temporary uprising or it is a real action? And this time is really closer to us. The battle was over and we came to the post-battle time. Today, we are still refugees and we still have West Bank and we have Gaza and division between Palestinian factions. And what is the worst is that we are still living much worse circumstances in Lebanon here, considering the circumstances that we are facing in Beirut. The question here, do we have conditions? Do we have requirements for the Palestinian liberation? The condition that we see and we use once the term us, that we always say they don't want us to liberate ourselves. They don't want us to access our land and to have a capital and state. We have a state, we have a capital, we have a land, and we have a heritage that we took from our ancestors. We don't want anyone to give us a state. We have the land. The only condition is that for one time, to be us, to be ourselves, and to depend and rely on ourselves. And the Palestinians can make history, can make victory, and can do whatever they want. But can we say politics are preventing us? No. Looking to what happened now, what moved this uprising, it was the Palestinian youth. We look at Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan. Now, who's going there? Who is shouting? And also in 1948, the Palestinians there, when they just gave them one green light that we have this land and we can decide and we can rely on ourselves even with the least possibilities, they were able to scare the colonialist, settler, Zionists that now they feel that they own everything. Again, the condition is that us. And to add to the condition of us is the cultural area, as mentioned by others. We cannot ignore this because I am an UNRWA school student, and the first thing they did is they took away a curriculum called Palestine Geography and Palestine Maps from our classes. And when we used to study geography, they would pass things about Palestine since because the teacher was Palestinian, as if he is doing something implicitly or behind the scenes, but where's Palestinian culture? Where is the culture and the syllabus and the school curriculum? Are we going to rely on youth groups who hold some symposiums or meetings in a given refugee camp to educate this generation of youth? No, this is not the way to do business. We need to impose this, that we have learned this from our ancestors, from our parents, and there's a culture that needs to exist. We should not forget this, and as they want us to do. And they want to strip us of this culture, and they are fighting us in geography, in history, and everything. Here comes the challenge for us as youths. And this is the first condition that we need to work on, this balance, which is the cultural balance. And then we can be victorious. Even the tools that we have are too small, and if we are unable to be this Palestinian, and if this Palestinian cannot do this, we cannot achieve. We will need several uprisings. We always hear that, okay, we have this uprising for 10 days, 15 days. No, it should not finish. Okay, we have, no, it does not happen. We are one voice, even our belonging to Palestine and our fragmentation outside Palestine in Europe or elsewhere through demonstrations or drawings or articles. This can contribute to regain Palestine, and Palestine remains the central cause for the Arab nation. So we cannot give up this so that they give us up. Hopefully I did not take time.
شكرا كثير رويدا.
Thank you, Ruwaida. No, you did not take longer than the time allocated to you. And I think your insights were very valuable. First, you reminded us also of the many challenges and problems that Palestinians in the diaspora face, and the questions of where are we heading in addition to the socioeconomic challenges. I lived in Lebanon for 10 years, and I lived in the Shatila refugee camp, and I know how it used to be. But then, of course, when we left Lebanon, things deteriorated a lot, and so Palestinians were humiliated, and there are 72 professions that Palestinians are not allowed to undertake, and so on and so forth in Lebanon, that is. But what you've mentioned, and the fact that the uprising gave a dose of hope, and that it is one of many battles for liberation. Not only you have a green identity card, I also in the West Bank have a green identity card. No, we have the blue card, and in the West Bank it is a green identity card. I felt that even before the uprising, the recent uprising and the first and second intifada, I was of the vibrancy of Palestinian nationalism continues to come through and shine through at a specific turning points. Suddenly we see this vibrancy, this vitality of Palestinian resistance, regardless of UNRWA and others. Even PA textbooks do not mention the history of Palestine before 1948, and does not mention that Haifa and the Jaffa are part of Palestine, because there is censorship by Israel on these Palestinian textbooks and curriculum. In any case, this reiterates the importance of Palestinian youth and their insistence on the Palestinian historic narrative with its different chapters, pre-1948, even to Balfour Declaration, and then to what happened in Lebanon, in Syria, in the West Bank, in Gaza Strip, in Jordan, and so on and so forth. This historic narrative should be documented kept, memorized, and taught to the younger generations, because this is the identity. This is how you construct an identity. It is to narrate our story. And if we have it distorted, then there is a serious problem, and I think they've succeeded in distorting the Palestinian historic narrative and the Palestinian geography and the Palestinian national and historic struggle, national struggle, and transforming it into terrorism and so on and so forth. And they changed even the names of the villages, the towns, the cities, in order not to take too much longer. Now I'll give the floor to Laura Albast, journalist, interpreter, and digital content editor. Laura, I don't have a lot about you, but I think it is sufficient to present you. If you want to add anything, you can add whatever you want about yourself. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Dr. Jamil, and thank you everyone for all the speakers. I came here to learn from you rather than speak, because from my experience is very limited compared to what is happening in Palestine. I just want to bring the perspective of Palestinian youth in North America, especially during the recent uprising, especially when we talk about the balance of power. And I want to talk about the narrative that has nothing to do with the mainstream media, but rather the local American communities and their media, who in many instances, they don't know even about the Palestine. We think that many Americans know about Palestine, Israel, but there is a lot of information missing and people don't know. I will start with what Dr. Hunaida mentioned in the first session today, is that the Palestinians in the diaspora are mostly forgotten, and they are afraid because they say that Palestinians in refugee camps or inside Palestine, maybe they will tell them, you don't have the right to express views because you are living in a luxury and while we are suffering. So we have these concerns, but any Palestinian living in any place has his own problems related to that place. We are also children of refugee camps and lived under oppressive regimes that where we are not allowed to express any views related to Palestine or even any other issue. And the Zionists are also following us and harassing us, like Canary Mission, who put pictures of Palestinian activists or any Palestinian who speaks about Palestine to destroy their lives, to prevent them from getting employment, and so that they are blacklisted. And of course, many of the Zionists here who agree with American right-wing supporters, especially the Republican Party members, to remove Palestinians from their jobs, such as teachers in the state of Virginia. They put Eid Mubarak for Palestinian people, and that is greetings for the Eid for the Palestinian people. So they launched a campaign against her, and they said that she's teaching our children about terrorism, and she should be removed from her job, and her job should be terminated. And so there are a lot of pressures also from the authorities, and it's not only during the recent uprising, but I talked about the oppression of the PA against the Palestinians. They sent me a message: we know, we hear you, we see you, and we are working with this or this party. And there were people even before the uprising during the past years. They find Palestinian activists in America, they attack them. Remove this video, don't say this, don't say that, we will show you. There's intimidation that Palestinians are facing. Of course, it is much less than what Palestinians are facing inside Palestine, in historic Palestine, but we're facing similar obstacles or intimidation if we have want to express any views. I want to focus on the role of the youth, because I worked a lot with the Palestinian youth movement in Northern America, especially during the recent uprising. There was a communication only. There's always communication among the different groups and organizations, friends and family in Palestine. But the communication that happened during the recent uprising It wasn't like this is happening, get out and do a rally. There was more. Communication was more meaningful. That was strengthening the relations among Palestinians in Northern America and Palestinians inside Palestine, including through culture and arts that you mentioned earlier. For example, in San Francisco, the Palestinian youth movement, together with other groups, did a mural about Palestine, that we will return and that we will be liberated. And they sent pictures of these murals to youth in Batn al-Hawa in Silwan neighborhood. And so the youth in Silwan did a mural to respond to what the murals done in Northern America. So this is a communication that we're not only defending ourselves and bringing the voice of Palestinians abroad, but we want to come closer together. I have family members in Haifa as a result of the Nakba. I don't know them. We have no communication. And so what we've done in terms of addressing the balance of power, maybe this does not shift the balance of power, but it could if it continues. For example, the rallies and the rallies that were launched in May, June, a little bit in July, and also next month, the Israeli Prime Minister is visiting the White House. We're going to meet him and protest, not meet him, of course, but in the sense of protesting against his visit. But there were also different communities supporting Palestinians who participated in these rallies. And this is the solidarity. How we view solidarity with the Palestinian question should be looked at differently, that we are all in a struggle, joint struggle against oppressive regimes, against peoples of different countries who are facing similar oppression and even similar technologies that the state of Israel occupation exports to countries who oppress protesters in their respective countries. So this is something we need to change when we support the Blacks in the US, not because we want them to support us back, but rather because their struggle is really our struggle as well. And the other thing, that in many cases we are happy when we see a Palestinian on CNN, Fox News, New York Times, and so on. They are Palestinians who are known like professors at universities or people who emerged quickly on social media, but we've seen a lack of communication means with Palestinians by the media corporations. For example, we were receiving, as Palestinian organization, we don't have anyone who we can meet with who is Palestinian. So we got a lot of requests to the organization. We want somebody to speak to the media to talk about the Palestinian opinion. So everyone in our organization were unable to meet all these requests because the media is geared towards specific people. But when we tell them, did you call this person or that? So they want to bring anyone to speak about Palestine. I had a situation whereby I don't have any problem to talk to the media, but without any specific affiliation, but I will speak as a Palestinian, regular Palestinian. I went out and spoke, and they started to defame me. They will take a few words here and there and edit the video in a way that would look as if I'm supporting Israel. And so it is very important to be careful of whom we talk to and who we will accept in terms of request. It's not to think that the media, we are there to defend ourselves. No, we have to impose ourselves on the media. You will not have to ask me whether or not I support this or that organization. Why don't you talk about occupation, colonization? Why are you doing this on social media? So we need to address media differently. Also in local media agencies, we focus on them. And this is something that we should not only limit to North America, but also in Europe, for the communities that require more awareness raising about the Palestinian question, and not to talk only to major news corporations, but also local news agencies. I talked to a radio in the Baltimore, in the Maryland state. We were 4 Palestinian youth, and they hosted us 3 times to talk about the topic, because it was the first time for them to hear anything about the Palestinian cause from how we addressed it. And we shifted the questions from questions if you are supporting this or that organization or fighting against Israel. And we changed it, and why we are Palestinians being under constant attack from pre-1948, and that there is a colonization project against Palestinians, and that there's occupation, and that there are people who are colonized. We don't want to shift the narrative, as somebody said during this session, that the narrative is not that we want a state. What Oslo did is that they changed this narrative as if we're demanding a state. It's not about that. This is a struggle between the colonizers and the colonized. And this is what we showed during the program. There were other also instances with other local radio stations. They started to defend themselves. So when we went in and we imposed ourselves and talked about our Palestinian cause, so they were talking to their audience and their public. I am from a certain background, and if I'm asking a question, I don't support any oppression of any people. So I said that we should not only defend ourselves, but rather impose ourselves and change this narrative in the future. And another thing, I think in sum, this is what I wanted to say. The Israeli Prime Minister will come next Thursday, and we will protest. We did not stop the campaigns or the things on social media, or the letters that we write and send out, or the pressure that we have, and the lobbying with the Congress members. But this is another issue. Yesterday, they bombed Gaza. Only Arabs know that Gaza was bombed. They only focus when we only respond. So this is another thing that we need to address. And I will stop here. Thank you, Laura. But I have something to ask of you. Thank you for the views and the challenges that young people face in Northern America, especially in how to face the media and how they try to make Palestinians or antagonize Palestinians. But it is not a problem to say that we are against colonization, against apartheid. And now there are Israeli organizations like B'Tselem and others that are saying Israel from the river to the sea is an apartheid state. And the Human Rights Watch said Israel is an apartheid state. So we have a support, and this state of apartheid includes all Palestinians in historic Palestine, and not only in the West Bank and Gaza. In 1948 as well. And so it is very difficult for them to say, where did you come up with this apartheid story? But this is something that has become commonly used in the international discourse, and even among academics, it has become usual. But now it is in the international media, it is acceptable. And I think there was something that was important that you mentioned, as how much the cultural sector is an important role. The tools of the culture are different. And this is to Razi, are different from the political instruments. In the political, there are political artists. I'll get back to you. There is certain discourse, there is parliament arrangements and so on, but in the cultural sector, there's the picture, the film, and the thing that you mentioned about the mural. This shows how important and how influential culture can be when political field fails. that can be a tool of salvation or to rebuild and re-establish the political realm. It is usually the cultural sector, from words, pictures, from murals, from theater, from drama, all of that, because they renew and revive the awareness. I'm talking about progressive democratic culture, of course.
اوكي لا في بتحكي هلا.
Just I have the right to respond if the yes. Okay, then the time now is for who else?
السيدة أو الآنسة أماني.
Miss Amani. Where's Amani? Do we have Amani here? Amani Khalifa.
نسيت شو كاتبين عنك والله.
I forgot what they about you. I lost my place. Present yourself.
4.
أنا اسمي أماني خليفي بالأساس من
Amani Khalifa. Abi from Jerusalem.
اسمها الجذور الشعبية.
I work at Al Judur Sha'bi organization and now I'm doing the in cultures. Which university?
العبرية.
The Hebron University.
والصراحة عم بكتب عن الاقتصاد.
I am writing about the political and cultural economy.
الصراحة هيك حاسة حالي بمصيدة.
I feel myself trapped since I'm the last speaker. There are many things that already discussed and I have things to respond to what was said and make my presentation. So I'll try to observe balance between this and that. At the start, we took the concept or title of the session that is to regain the Palestinian cause as if it is lost already. I don't think we should deal with this title without discussing its issues and its assumption, because after 100 years of colonialism and the different uprisings,
بما إنه صراع وجود هو
since it is a conflict, existential conflict, I cannot say we have lost or the Palestinian cause have lost its position, and also the solidarity not only in Europe and America but also in other areas mentioned by the previous speakers. It is an indication that the Palestinian cause is still a basic issue. Now, how we deal it, this is something different. But to say lost it, no, I doubt it. It's extremely important not to make such assumptions on the current situation. The next level to speak about the uprising, this is a problem, and I agree with Dana. Said this is a milestone, especially that I am in Jerusalem and I was on the ground, and those in the ground since Muhammad Abu Khadir uprising and Bab al-Asbat uprising and the daily practices and action and reaction. So this is an accumulative process ongoing on. And we need to be very vigilant if we say the uprising is over, because it took a different form. Maybe the military showdown is over, but I doubt, and as Noura mentioned, that demonstrations are there, the popular committees in 1948 areas, and situation in Jerusalem continues. Even in the West Bank, it is taking a different form, but let's try to consider it as a beginning and end span of time. And the beginning point here, which is central here, is that we start with the practice, not implicit concepts that form a discourse that we reproduce. It is such a strong event, and we cannot say that we have unorganized discourse. It is something that we understand. We are part of it in our different situations, positions. So we need to be very vigilant here. Speaking of the political solution and the historical issues that we are having, be it at the level of occupied territories or 1967 and 48. And it's important, the starting point is important, which is a change in the balance of power. When the flag procession was stopped, this stopped with the first rocket coming from Gaza. So you understand that there are in many points you discover the new things. You rediscover the possible things. And to go back to Jerusalem, and here I build my understanding to this situation. And the military showdown, that was the first one, were around the metal detectors. The moment this showdown ended, where the Jerusalemites succeeded in regaining their presence, it was such an important point about Jerusalem. The same night of celebrating that moment, when Israel had to remove these metal detectors, there were activities by the Israeli occupation municipality, and it was the first day of Ramadan. People spent penny worth. They started going to Sheikh Jarrah on the first day. They used to take their meals with them. And this was not organized, was not an organized action. And from there, we started noticing that the geography of confrontation is changing, meaning that many previous years, the stairs of Bab al-Amud was a central place of event. Then this moved to Sheikh Jarrah, then it moved to Shara al-Zahra and Salahuddin Street and all in downtown, in the old town. So the presence was different. You are in Sheikh Jarrah, and girls and youths from 1948 areas, they come to Jerusalem with their own cars. So the concept of political activism, and here I agree with Razi, the concept of political activism is different. There are two moments. It will take much time for us to understand and comprehend them. As in Jerusalem, when the buses that were prevented from accessing Jerusalem during Ramadan, and how Jerusalemite people went in their private cars to move people to go for prayers, and then confrontations erupted. And at the end, this forced demands were imposed, and so we need to be very cautious that yes, we can impose and impose change in the balance of power. And the situation in Jerusalem is similar to many things in 1948. So not only political parties, although they are absent and they do not play a role, people in 1948 who took to the streets and who were arrested there were the most segments that were targeted, which are the poor ones. And they were dubbed as people in the criminal area, but they attacked the police vehicles. That is the first authority that runs the organized crime. This was not a marginal moment that we recall. It is an important milestone moment. But the arrests that followed led to creating a popular committee I'm sorry, I went to a different point. I was speaking about the second level, which is the CSOs in 1948 and 1967. And here we're speaking about cultural action. These organizations were not absented by chance, but these were part of structures that have that hegemony. We don't have a management, we don't have a self-management and decision within these organizations. Our presence in these organizations turned us from activist individuals into professionals. So we have coordinators of activities and so forth. So if we want to understand this, there was a local action because many local committees that we had developed. Now, if you look at Dakkak, for instance, youth there are still demonstrating and supporting the detainees, and there are local funds, popular committees that support demonstrate against the Israeli policies of arrests and similar policies.
بالقدس
والمراكز soft policies and the popular centers by Israel targeting the Palestinian Jerusalemite youths. So it's important to understand these moments. Maybe simple movements on the ground, we need to invest in them. And I conclude with this support and connectivity between the different popular segments when Jerusalemites went to Lod, when Lod was besieged. They went with their own cars. Jerusalem was separated, and now if you go and to repeat, speaking of Jerusalem, of international organizations, so we need to start investing in these moments. So I agree with the start that Hashem mentioned, that we have contexts and geographic contexts that are different in different contexts, but now we are speaking among the most important thing, which is knowledge production. We need to start asking ourselves why knowledge production is part of the colonialist geography produced by the Zionists. Now I am researching the cultural production, such as there are no studies that speak about culture beyond this geography. The borders that we are trapped in, it does not look at Palestine as something that is collective. These are the moments that we need to build on at the level of our action to leave this molds that the colonialism trapped us in. And we can look, and Jamil, you mentioned the issue of Human Rights Watch and the hypocrisy of this organization in dealing with the Palestinians. Because yes, they published a report on apartheid. It was published based on vision and interest.
ثاني لإلهن اللي هو يعتبر سابقة بكل ما يتعلق بالمقاومة بغزة اللي هن حسب رأيهم.
There's this report that was a precedence that they say that Hamas needs to be prosecuted internationally. Anyone as Palestinians and institutions have to boycott an organization like Human Rights Watch. We need to have the power and authority over our narrative and should not be affiliated with any international interest as much as possible. And so if I want to conclude, I think we should not pin on this uprising, but at the same time not to undermine the importance and significance of small moments that we can build upon and try as much as possible to move away from some kind of preconceived ideas and how we project them on what happened and how things need to be changed or how liberation should take place. So, and that's it. And thank you. Thank you, Amani. Very important issues were raised, that the uprising continues. And this is something to reflect upon. In what way is it continuing, this uprising, and how can this form and becomes more permanent, and that it is not only sporadic uprisings, and there is no center or centers that can invest in and build and contemplate and reflect on the lessons learned and how these uprisings become a permanent phenomena. Of course, this would affect the balance of power. It would confuse the enemy and will increase international support and solidarity. I think international is not secondary, it's very important, because if we want to change the balance of power, whether in America or around the world, or in the Arab countries, or even in the PA, requires a lot of work. Many things were mentioned, but maybe we'll hear from the other speakers if they want to add or clarify or from everything that was mentioned thus far. Now the session is open for discussion. I looked at the questions. I haven't seen things. It's all about thanks and expressing thanks to the session. So let us discuss. It was already mentioned because a lot has been said so far, and is worth of more exploration and discussion. And so you can now all unmute yourself, but in order to organize the discussion, please raise your hand so I can give you. So just to organize the discussions rather. I thank everyone. It was very interesting. I'm always pleased when we have Palestinian youth from all around. And this is some of the discussions that give us a boost forward, and that we need to strengthen this dialogue among ourselves, whether Palestinians in Beirut, in America, everywhere inside Palestine, 1948 territories, not to find we will not find solutions or move forward except if we engage in such dialogues. That's something that is repeated, and it is about the spontaneity of this uprising, and it's something that we see repeated in many articles, that these movements are unorganized, that they don't have political parties behind them, or that the youth engaged in it do not have political affiliations. I think we need to stop here and read things properly, correctly. Palestinian youth, we are affiliated with political parties. Let me finish this idea, and then I know that we will disagree in our views. I just need 3 minutes. I think when we look at Palestinian universities, when we go to Birzeit University, the voting percentage in the Students' Council is 70%, and it's for political parties. But we know that political parties are in dire situation and that they are very weak, but I want to say that those who are part of organizing this uprising, even the strike of 18th of May started from 1948. It started from 1948, but how can we were able to get it to all parts of Palestine, whether inside Palestine or outside, even at the Golan borders or in Beirut, and everywhere in the refugee camps. This was by youth. Some of them are politically active and political activists. Many of the youth are there because they are political activists and they belong to these different political parties, and they have experience in organizing some of the events because they are part of these political parties in universities or outside it. But the other thing is how Israel aborts any collective initiative or effort, because Israel is fearful of any collective action or initiative. Israel works by all means to end it, to stop it, to stifle it. Yesterday was the anniversary of Ain Bubin, an attack that happened near Ramallah, where there is a lot of Israeli military surveillance. This an organized Palestinian youth who are being prosecuted in Israeli courts, and because Israel knew that this was an organized act, more than 100 comrades of that political party, because the attack was linked to that political party, and they tried through all we talked about the torture, and we've heard about Samir al-Arbid and how he was severely tortured because Israel refuses any act to be organized or that it is linked to political parties. And of course, they also attack and oppress any individual attacks without any affiliation to political parties. We see that there's always collective punishment if somebody carries out an operation. And so it is not only about the person who carried out the operation, but it's also the family, the neighborhood, the friends. So in order to deter anyone from doing other similar things. The other thing that I need to talk about, that we have different forms of resistance and different ways and spaces to express that. We can express our resistance in different forms, and this is different from previous years when there were clear political parties with their actions and their interventions. But even after the uprising ended and we see the arrests now, we see there were many young people who were arrested, who were organizing the uprising, and many of them are members of political parties and affiliated with them, regardless if they were acting as individuals or as members of these political parties, but they come from that background. Thank you, Dana. Thank you. That is important. I don't know if somebody can speak about that. If you talk about different forms of resistance, about social media instruments and how platforms and how they were used during this uprising. I think there was a use of the social media abroad and also inside Palestine. I would go to Facebook in order to get all the details and the recent events. So Razi, if you have the floor. First, I wanted to talk about two issues. Dana, I want to apologize for interrupting you, and I didn't have the right to do that. I just felt spontaneously to respond. So I first apologize for having interrupted you. The other thing, I wanted also to talk about culture. I didn't say, or I don't talk about individuals. Yes, individuals were there. I was at one point a member of some form of political party. And many of the people I work with who used to be part of political parties and groups. And so this is something that we don't disagree about. But why are these political parties are not using their name when they are intervening, and why they don't call upon their activists to engage in these protests? Because they cannot using their own names as political factions to call for that engagement, because the people will not listen to them. In order to destroy any planned activity, just say that a political party is organizing it. Any political event in that sense. And secondly, it is not important for me, the person who's coming to the protest, what background he has. I want to see in what capacity he's coming. Is whether he's from a right-wing party or even a Tahrir party. I don't care about that. I'm talking about general political parties and forces that are paralyzed, basically. And this is very clear. We can say that they maybe raise some activists that are well organized and we're working with them today, but this doesn't mean that they have the credit now, because I know that at one stage we need to transcend, and that is the political parties, because they are also some form of destroying the efforts of the youth. They are not only not supporting, but rather bringing the young people backwards, pulling them backwards. And so we need to talk as Palestinians how we have a political framework that can accept all the different spectrum of political views, but that are come together under one framework. And I say that everybody has sacrificed and did a lot, but in the current general political situation, I think these political parties, their historic role has expired. And even if they do something here and there, but there is a historic role that they are not doing. These parties are not mobilizing, not recruiting more people. They don't have visions. They don't have headquarters. They don't have strategies. They are not known what their demands are today and what their vision is today. I'm saying that in general terms. I'm not talking about one specific political party. I'm saying about the political parties in general. Yes, whenever there is an uprising, it is a spontaneous movement, a spark. It is in response to a crime that is committed by Israel. And then the Palestinian people go out and respond to it, or through individual initiatives, as for example, in individual attacks. And recently, whenever there is an uprising in Palestine, it's usually in Jerusalem, starting from Jerusalem. And that is because Jerusalem is outside the custody of political parties and the PA. And that is why Jerusalem has a spirit that is spontaneous. And I'm not saying that it's spontaneous, that somebody just decides to do that, but that it is not a political decision or a decision of a political party. This was the decision based on the pain and suffering of the Palestinian people in Jerusalem. As for culture, I'm not saying that culture is not important. I think that we cannot have politics without culture, but at the same time, I can say without politics, there isn't culture. When we talk about historic Palestine, we need also a political program that would decide what its boundaries are, what they want. And so when we talk about Jaffa oranges in our literature, this is part of the political program that was in refugee camps. So separating politics from culture and vice versa, or the relations between them, is inseparable. You cannot separate them in any way or form, because they are rights of the human beings. Culture is an expression, artistic expression, identity expression about a political aspiration, about a political situation. Sometimes it goes before politics, sometimes it's coming behind politics, but we cannot in any way or form separate them. And that's it. And thank you. Thank you. I still think that there is some form of relative independence between culture and politics, but this is my opinion. Nobody talked about restructuring or the need to rebuild and reconstruct the PLO. When we talk about representation, I'm talking about rebuilding, not reforming or reviving. I'm talking about rebuilding the PLO based on democratic foundations, representation of all Palestinians. If you think it is not important, I don't mind. But the question of representation, that we have a question of representation and the Palestinian National Project and what it is.
تفضلي.
ما بعرف فكرت رفع
رويدة تفضلي.
انا بدي
Go ahead.
على السؤال اللي
I wanted to answer your previous question on the role of social media. And to start with what Laura mentioned, that there will be individuals and hosted and channels to speak about Palestine on the Jerusalem uprising, and this is important that what she mentioned. And when I prepared my programs and we had Palestinian guests on cultural, social issues, we always had difficulties in accessing people. Why? I don't know if this is the cost of being refugees, that we are in different geographies, we don't know each other, to be able to do this. So here the problem is that we are politically fragmented, socially fragmented, and even in cultural issues. Many people could be successful and can speak in any area, but we have difficulty in accessing them because we are, Dr. Jamil, we return to the new media on how to use this, use the social media, how to bring ourselves together again, but not necessarily to be, this is stereotype about Palestinians. Palestinians are the ones who will carry the stones and fight. Okay, fine, no problem with this. But the Palestinians are educated, Palestinians are scholars, Palestinians can be everywhere. So maybe through this new media, how we can use it again, how we used it during the Jerusalem uprising. I'm speaking about ourselves here in Lebanon. On the south, we have checkpoints that we can cross without permits. So the social media was the means that we used to express solidarity and participate in what was happening in Palestine. So we can use this to fight and to expand our space and regather again. This is what I wanted to say in social media, how it helped us and to be better here. Many people spoke, even Laura in America and others, they don't know much about Palestine and don't go far away. Even here in Lebanon, many things were absent, that the Palestinian was connected with war, with 1975, and that's it. But here there is something new that contributed us to strengthen our discourse. As for the PLO, I don't want to answer this. That's one of the subjects. Anyway, thank you. I believe for the social media, it is not limited to the uprising, it's ongoing. So in the political and cultural life and social life, with those who are following it, important for them, and there are many things that you learn through social media. I don't know if this is general or individual or whatever.
انتبهوا للموضوع ولا لا؟ بس إذا دخلت
فيه or not. If it is part of the daily life of people or sometimes or not.
تفضلي لورا.
بس فيني أضيف على السريع يعني.
If I can add something to what Ruwaida mentioned. For instance, in the uprising, there are no guests and no Palestinian awareness. The Palestinians went to the social media and Diaspora to take the role of journalists. So when bombardment was in Gaza, no one was speaking with Gaza. Palestinians communicated with Palestinian youth in Gaza to be live on Instagram. So we record this, tell us what's going on, and we would translate that into English. Same thing when Maryam al-Afifi was arrested in Sheikh Jarrah. No one wrote about it in the West, but these youths acted on social media. This is something new. As Ruwaida said, we are using it for our interest, especially during the uprising. There was a concern by the Zionists, because there was change in the discourse. There is a use of hashtags such as Gaza under attack or others, and they wanted to change so much that made a counter campaign that failed. That please publish a blue square to support, to show your support for the Israeli occupation, but no, they failed. We need to continue. Now there's a question for me that is the US citizens, why they did not speak about their identity or interact. America is not a country of freedom, unlike what we see, especially in the issue of racial discrimination. If you are not a white American, then you are under scrutiny all the time. My family is not American. I am a refugee. So there are risks. If I speak something, they might file lawsuits to revoke my nationality. Many people whose parents are refugees and blacks, when they are arrested, they are original American citizens. Still, they are oppressed in a brutal way by the American society. And so the issue is not that if you have American or European nationality, you are strong enough to speak the way you wish. If they can speak and they have the support of an organization, fine, but there are many American Palestinians are before courts in America battling back lawsuits against them. The Zionists are destroying their lives, and to hush any Palestinian voice outside Palestine. Hopefully it's clear. Thank you. Who else? Please, the interpreters are requesting that you speak slowly as Dana was speaking. They are already tired, and this is a long day.
هاشم كأنه جاي على بالك تحكي.
Hashem, would you like to speak? I was thinking of your question about restructuring PLO. I cannot answer it, but I think it's related to what Dana mentioned about the role of parties. These parties are marginalized, but I believe their heritage and these organizations should not be, not everything to be new. We need to take this into consideration when we are building on that. The next thing, I don't know if you agree with me, but I felt that the uprising was in the cities, and there was not enough participation by the rural areas. Is this true that the refugee camps and the rural areas did not participate? It's good to know this, if this is true or not, because it is maybe you can easily tell people to gather at a certain square, but from the village to bring from rural areas to the cities, I don't know someone who has experience or reflections on this.
كان سؤالي بس بدي استفهم عن المخيمات داخل.
Are you referring to refugee camps in Palestine or Lebanon and Syria?
المخيمات لا.
No, refugee camps in Lebanon, I answered that.
يعني أكثر شيء كان ممكن إنه يكون في
The most important thing that marches were in the refugee camps every day. We had such demonstrations.
جغرافيا يعني دكتور جميل أنت بتعرف إنه مخيمات
you know the Rashidiya's camp is different from that of Beirut.
وهن فعليا ما فيهم كلهم يلقوا وحده او بمكان واحد، يعني خارج اطار مخيم خلص بيكون صادوا ترخيص من الدوله
If you
اللبنانيه.
are outside the refugee camp, then you will need license for such activities.
عم بتكون موجوده وداعمه ومسانده للي كان عم بيصير بفلسطين.
But there were activities that were supportive of what was happening in Palestine.
يمكن كل واحد فينا كان عنده حلم انه يروح.
Each of us had that dream to go to the borders with Palestine and open that gate and enter Palestine as if it is liberated, but restrictions prevented that. And we return back to the square one, that we are still refugees and this battle continues currently. So there were only marches within the refugee camp.
هاشم
تفضل أماني، تفضلي أنت مخيمات
Amani, refugee camps in Jerusalem,
يعني مخيم شعفاط ومخيم قلنديا
مثلا
such as Shafat and Khalandia refugee camps.
يعني طبعا هن بمواجهه مستمره، بس كمان يعني احنا شفنا اللاجئين والمسيرات اللي طلعت
We
من
saw the refugees and marched from Jordan border.
بنت اختي كنا
I remember
كان أول
my niece, we were at home together,
وكانت عم تحكي لي وصلوا
and she was telling me that, okay, they are here, let's invite them, that refugees from Jordan.
المشهد كان عظيم يعني والأعداد
So it was a great scene at that moment. But I would like to go back to the issue of spontaneity and to see where it's important not to see the spontaneous action and put it in the negative thing. That if it is not organized, so it is not successful. There is a political decision that we need to have. Why they need to define everything? Because in this relation between the authority and this action will be tamed by the authority, PA. It will find new means of taming this spontaneous action. I remember during the uprising at Bab al-Asbab, journalists and foreigners used to speak with me, telling me, asking me, this social media, is it the one that is sending people to the old town? And I said, yes, let it be. Because if a white journalist thinks that social media is doing the, why to produce free knowledge for colonizer? And they are spontaneous with their force. And in 1948, the political organized factions, and I agree with Razi,
بس أغلب الناس اللي
is
كانت
not that much, but most of the movement and activism, such as in Al-Faham in particular, there was the Al-Faham activism
ضد
that
العنف
used to go out every week.
عليها وكان
And so there was that hard nucleus for such activism, but in Kufr Qala, it was not there, in Qalans, but was not there. And these people who took to the streets are the most impoverished people. Those who were in the streets had nothing to lose in terms of their relation with the Israeli organization. Others did not go because they had something to lose. Sorry to say this.
في بعد طبقي بتقول يعني بالموضوع.
So there is that class dimension. Yes, it is always there. I need to clarify. Speaking about the refugee camps, I will speak about their participation in demonstrations against the Palestinian Authority.
بس هل صحيح إنه ضد السلطة ما شاركوا؟ ما بعرف.
The PA did not participate.
ما حدش عمل استفتاء.
No one wrote about this. This is a worth question, worth asking.
بالعروب بحس إنه يعني الموضوع بتم احتوائه زي كأنه
In Arroub Refugee Camp, as if it is something between clans and families.
سيطرة عائلات معينة
They
على
are controlling the political scene through the control of families and clans. Dana?
يعني خلال هبة أيار في 34 شهيد ارتقوا يعني بس
during the May uprising, there were more people killed in the West Bank compared to Gaza Strip, and most of them came from villages and rural areas because clashes in cities, they are made, they are constructed, fabricated, especially in Ramallah. I live in Ramallah. We say that there is Beit Il and Ofer checkpoints, and they are there so that you can go and clash, and the soldiers are on top of the hills, and they are snipers killing the protesters, whereas in villages, the villagers are able to drag the soldiers inside their space, and they have the ownership over the space, rather than at Beit Il checkpoint where you are down and the soldiers are on top of the hills. In Beit Il, because we are all on the ground, whereas the soldiers are on top of the hill. Anyone who shoots, there will be killed. The soldiers will kill them. But in the villages, they are able to drag the soldiers inside the village in their own space. And so the clashes there are different from what happens in the cities. And they are more violent. And as for the PA, I agree with what Hashem said in terms of what is happening now after the assassination of Nizar Banat. The focus is inside cities, because in villages there are social ties with those people who are working with the PA and those who are opposing the PA. And this is a big question that we need to address. Where are we today in terms of our relationship with the PA, with the people? Because we are in a protest demanding justice for Nizar and against the political detention. We see university students who were used to be our classmates at the university, and they carry weapons and batons, and they are harassing the protesters. I'm a lawyer. I know that when there was a protest in front of the Ramallah police station to demand the liberation of one of the detainees, and they arrested everyone at that day. The police are the same who were working also in the court. The next day when I went to report to my work in the court, he is the policeman. I will see him all the time, and I saw him beating mothers and harassing them for protesting. And we are from the same people. And Jerusalem, they did not reach that situation. In Ras Al Amud, it is very clear. There are people who are occupied, and there are Israeli soldiers. And so the relationship is very clear cut, colonizers and colonized. But now we are beaten by our own people. When you saw that policeman, and did you tell him anything or say something to him? I can't. They are, some of them used to study with us in the universities, and I knew them. Did the relationship change? Did you say anything to them? It is really a paradox. It is irony. It is dark irony. And this is Dighton. This is Dighton project. This is a training of Dighton, General Dighton. That is. If I know that I want to clarify something. When I talked about spontaneity and organization, I did not have a position that was with or against this. This is my analysis. This is an objective analysis of the situation. As for my position, if I need to clarify it, my position is that the events were spontaneous and things happened spontaneously, but they cannot continue. Spontaneity has a specific time frame, and after that there is a need for organizing. Do we need to organize ourselves? This is something that I understand implicitly, but the question is, how do we do that? How do we start? Do we still need time? And so this is something that I want to clarify. And the other thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and this is something that Laura mentioned, that we are outside and they say and tell us, those who are in Palestine, they tell us you are living luxuriously and you don't suffer like Palestinians inside Palestine. Since we're talking about unity and about Palestinian people everywhere, one of the things that are important for us to do is to break down these illusionary borders and boundaries between us so that we know the pain of every Palestinian wherever they are. I am confident that something that I found very useful in my life in Ramallah and that no refugee knows is that your Palestinian identity in Ramallah is understood implicitly. But the suffering of a refugee, to say that he is Palestinian, is not less suffering than the current suffering that we face inside Palestine. And we as Palestinians, we need to we should not say who suffers more and as such can speak more. Whoever can speak more, then they have to raise their voice more, not about the suffering. We have walls, illusionary walls that are built on stereotypical images built by the colonization, that Palestinians living in the US are living luxuriously and are happy. But it's not true. We are 1948 Palestinians. We know also we are refugees in our own homeland. We suffer in the same manner. To live half of your life until you are able to say that you are Palestinian and then start to mobilize. Those living in West Bank, Gaza, and they know that the only house I lived in and for the first time is my house in Ramallah, and I didn't have to raise my Palestinian flag because my identity is known there. But as refugees, we have to stop and say who suffers most. Anybody who can raise the voice, even if they live in the North Pole, they can still talk. And we need to break down these boundaries created by the colonization, the colonials, between us and separate us, and they are illusionary. I agree totally with what you've said, Razi, and we can see this diversity in the different locations of the Palestinian people have also advantages. If somebody is oppressed somewhere, there is somebody else who can carry the banner and show solidarity and raise the voice against the oppression that you are subjected to. And so this is good. This is something that we should not think of as a negative. And because there are, of course, settler colonialism, but it has its own advantages that need to be thought about, and not to feel it as a sense of inferiority or a complex that Laura had expressed, that we are excluded or that we are forgotten, as Ruwaida mentioned. And here I can give a very small example. Our presence around the world is a point of strength, and we need to have some kind of complementarity. If we look at the Jews who live in Israel and those who live abroad, how they deal with each other, how they help each other, how they benefit each other, this is something that we can one of the most important things that emerged from the uprising, those who are in Canada and can create a Facebook page and has no problem to do that, then they should do that. Some people say that you have an Israeli ID, so you can say whatever you want and you cannot be arrested in the West Bank. Then this is something that we need to build upon and benefit from. We should think all the time of how we benefit from each other without trying. Thank you, Jamil, because you followed up on my idea.